Good afternoon, all. I hope everybody had a good lunch. What we're going to talk about today with our two honored panelists. Jan Kessel is president of Environics Analytics, arguably the source of data and wise use of data in the Canadian marketplace. And Olga Romero-Marshall is senior manager campaign. Director of Marketing Digital for Bell Mobility. So Olga's going to share some what she's experiencing and what digital transformation looks like for a brand like Bell Mobility. And Jan and I are going to talk a little bit about, is digital broken? So if you think about the last 15, 20 years that we've been using digital as a marketing tool, we came to it with a mass marketing mentality, and I'm not sure we did it justice. That mass marketing mentality, and some of the generation in this room, you didn't come with that, but your boss did. So you were directed to do things within the context of mass marketing. And email marketing and online and the use of data is anything but mass marketing. It's the opposite. But we keep coming at it with the same mindset. So it's interesting. I look at the stats in Forbes and Wired. Everything online's going north. Everything. Number of Facebook accounts, number of likes, number of posts. Everything's going up. Except the one thing that's most important to us, engagement, it's going down. And I ask myself as a marketer, why is that? And that's what we're going to discuss today, is some of the factors that we think why engagement's tough. Because when we try to shove our brands down their throat using social media, this one talks back. You can sit and use TV or our traditional methods all you want, and it didn't give any pushback. This one does. So welcome to the stage, Olga and Jen.
Hello.
So I know that everything that Olga does in her capacity, it all starts with strategy, and not digital strategy, strategy. What's the company up to? And I know she's very conscious of that. When they run campaigns, they consider the overall patient, not just the arm, okay? So we'll get into some more of the technical, but I think I'd like to start, Jan, if you would, with, we just witnessed Cambridge Analytica. How many people in the room know about Cambridge Analytica? So Jan and I have been talking about this, and while people are saying it was a data breach, I assert that it was an ethics breach more than a data breach. It's what they did with the data that was nasty. Companies like Jan's company, they're very careful to know where that line is and always respect it, and Cambridge Analytica wasn't. But what it did do was it woke up the average person on the street to what could be done with their data. Not necessarily is being done, but what could be done, and I think it rattled a lot of people. So GDPR is beginning to look like it might make sense. We're going, in Canada, we're going with PIPEDA, we're moving to a GDPR level model. I had a 2-hour conversation yesterday morning with the policy team. They're trying to take CASL and PIPEDA and more align them. But it's going to take a couple of years. Yeah, I know, eh? In Jan and my companies, we would have that done in a couple of weeks, but let's not go there. So Jan.
I don't know about that. I worked on PIPEDA, I think, in the early consultations in the 90s, and though it's a great, it's a great privacy law compared to everything else in the world, it was a little hard to get there as well. But I want to go back to what you said at the beginning of your remarks, Derek, which is seeing all of the indicators of different kinds of expenditure on digital marketing and mobile marketing. I mean, I'm almost reluctant to use the word digital anymore because it's all it's everything. But seeing that go up and seeing engagement go down. And I think the real crux of the matter is the same as it's always been, which is whether we're a business or a not-for-profit or a public sector organization, consumers and citizens. So we live in an era where you read the business press or listen to our government, analytics and data-driven decision-making is the secret sauce. It's the pathway to profitability, to productivity, using your data to understand your customer and to connect with them in the way they want to be connected with the right message at the right time. So there's a big thrust for that. We live in a data-driven economy. The Minister responsible for innovation and industry in Canada announced in the summer that Canada was going to move from being a primary resource-based industry to being a data-driven economy. And at the same time, we have this real concern about what are you doing with my data? Now, I don't know how long you want me to go on here because this is a big topic for me. But you know, some people think, oh, well, nobody cares about privacy anymore, or the younger generation doesn't care about privacy. They'll go and they'll post anything everywhere. That's kind of an antiquated baby boomer like me point of view. What I know now is that the young generation, you care about your privacy. You just know better than we do about how to control it and how to make your choices. So survey research shows that Canadians do care. And the bottom line is people want the brands that they interact with to use their data in a way that is, number one, good for them. Number two, in the way that they had a right to expect it to be used. And that's the basis of all the good privacy legislation and CASL and everything that we've put into effect in Canada. You can say there's weaknesses, but the reality is Canada has been on the forefront of doing the right thing. So when you see something like what happened with Cambridge Analytica, and I have people from all over North America writing to me and saying, oh, this is terrible, you know, third-party data companies are going to go out of business, and I hope you're not suffering too much. And I'm like, what? We're fine. And, you know, we only use data in our analysis that's been collected on the basis of consent according to the law. We only work with a customer's own data in a protected firewall community for their data only. We don't mingle any individual personal data. So when you think about what happened in the scandal, someone collected data in an app that was purported to be for academic research. That academic research data was shared with a private company, and that private company sold the data.
The word shared is an intentional one. It was not sold. It was shared.
Regardless of what was in the agreements, and you know, the lawyers can argue, well, if you read all the details in the Facebook agreements and so on, maybe it was allowed, maybe it wasn't. The fact is that those data were used in a way that the people who provided the data didn't have any reasonable way to expect that to happen. And that's, as I agree with you, it's an ethical issue. But what it means for us in Canada is that we have to build into all of our processes privacy beyond what we expect. We did a survey about 2 years ago of a large number of our customers, and we have about 1,500 businesses in Canada using our services. And we asked them, what are you doing about compliance? And overwhelmingly the response was our compliance rules are PIPEDA and CASL. Those are the laws. Those are not your internal. So having a chief data officer, having chief compliance officers, understanding standards, you know, the GDPR that Derek mentions is going to go into effect in Europe a week from tomorrow. It has many aspects. If you haven't read it, well, it's kind of a slog, but I'm sure your lawyers have read it. It does have implications for Canadian companies, but basically the first implementation of it is going to be very PIPEDA-like. But what it means that global brands are not going to be willing to have one set of rules about what happens to their data in Canada and in Europe and in the United States. We don't see a lot of legislation and regulatory activity in the U.S. There's some rumblings, but they're a little behind, to say the least. But it does mean that businesses are going to take the initiatives, that there are going to be standards. The Canadian Standards Council is now going to look at a GDPR-type law for Canada. So now we're going to have 3 government departments. We're going to have the Office of the Privacy Commissioner. We're going to have the CRTC on CASL. And now we're going to have the Canadian Standards Council look at what we need. And we do need to go beyond PIPEDA and CASL. We need to talk about what can you do with data inside an organization? What's reasonable to link a customer's record of activity doing one thing and another? Does CASL prevent using the email address as a match key for crawling after people on the internet? All of these things are up in the air. When you ask your lawyers in any large company in Canada, they'll just tell you, no, can't do anything. For good reason. People have had, actions and warnings and investigations. So to sum it up, you have to build the principle of not only what can I do, but what should I do. You have to make sure that you're using the data that you get from consumers to make the offers and the services that you provide to them, to make sure those services make their lives better or easier. You have to ensure that you're using the data for the purpose it was intended. And as good marketers, you have to have a holistic view of the customer and make sure, we used to say in 1993 or something, if anybody's old enough to remember CompuSearch, it was the first company that targeted direct mail with demographics, and I ran that business for a number of years, and I remember saying in an article to the Globe and Mail, she was saying, well, you're responsible for all the junk mail I get, and we used to say, we're responsible for the junk mail you don't get. And if you as good digital marketers do a good job of insights and really understand your customers and their preferences, and you understand what you should do, what a customer can reasonably expect you to do, you'll be responsible for people getting advertising messages that are relevant to them. And we as an industry will maintain a trust between marketers and consumers. We can't go in any other direction.
Yeah, how many of you are aware of privacy by design and default? By show of hands. So privacy by design and default allows you to build privacy in as you're developing your product. You actually have to consider the data and the privacy side of it when you're actually creating the product. We have a couple of our clients who are actually in that stage, and watching them operate is actually wonderful because they always do the right thing. As they're developing the product, they build it right in, and they have a culture in the organization for respecting privacy and people's rights. One of the things that Jan said a couple times that really struck me was the GDPR in Europe actually includes that conversation is if it's reasonable to expect you to do something with the data or to send an email or to process in some way. If the recipient, it's reasonable for them to expect it, it's allowed in some cases. So they're challenging you, like, is somebody going to be left after, for instance, getting an email? Are they going to be left with, why did they send this to me? Do you all get those kinds of emails? Why did I get this? You should never leave your consumer in that space. If anybody's on your list that's going to be left, why the hell are they sending this to me? Get them off your list. Bigger isn't better when it comes to digital marketing. Better is better. Bigger isn't. Bigger's better when you're buying mass media. Bigger's good. Digital, not so much. Getting it right, getting engagement, then you can scale. So that's a perfect segue into Olga's contribution. I think that Olga has some great stories from actually converting some of this digital speak, and I don't think that you segregate it at Bell Mobility as digital, and it's just all tools available to you.
Yeah, exactly.
But you're conscious of how you use them, so I'll let you speak about
Yeah, I mean, it's very much so, and it is a lot of those points that you had mentioned, and I grew up in the world of direct marketing and databases and launching CASL at Bell, so there is a lot of awareness and consciousness and wanting to be a good marketer and the right message to the right person at the right time. And to your point, we don't see digital for the sake of digital. It really starts with, what is the objective? Like really at the end of the day, we're not rushing to one medium over another medium. It really truly is integrated. So it starts with the objective and what is it that we're really trying to do? What is it that we're really trying to accomplish with this? Who is our audience? Who are we really speaking to be relevant and meaningful? It relies on understanding on who our audience is and what our message is. And the complexity of the message. Like sometimes, holy cow, our messages are pretty complex. And if they are, sometimes different formats within the digital space don't lend themselves that great to a very complex message. So it really sort of depends on what are we trying to achieve, who are we talking to, the complexity of our message, and how are we going to define success? So 8 months from now or 8 weeks from now or whatever our time frame is, when we're looking back, what is it that we're going to measure? What is it that we're going to learn? What is it that we're going to say this campaign was either successful or not success? And are we going to do it again? We're very cyclical. And really, what did we learn and gain from that? What are our metrics of success?
Do you have an upfront conversation about what KPIs are important in a campaign?
Yeah, we talk a lot about that because there's
Because
no...
likes, what are likes worth?
Oh, exactly. Like it's, and you can go quite circular, in it. And it's, there's not a holy grail. There's not just one thing. It's a number of ones. But I think it's really important to be conscious of what exactly are you measuring, and if you're measuring intent, what is intent. And one of the downsides with everything really being automated is things just run, and they just run in the background. And if you don't stop and lift that hood to see what's really running, you actually might be optimizing to the wrong things. So when I took over the portfolio, we started to do that, and where things made a lot of sense, a year and a half ago, we were optimizing our buys to certain metrics and to certain proxies. A year and a half later, when a lot of the landscape has changed, that doesn't make sense anymore. But because it's running behind the scenes, it's not in your face, you're not always seeing that.
So Procter & Gamble decided a year ago that there was so much digital fraud going on, bought traffic for the sites that they were buying. They were paying good ad dollars, and it was bots. It wasn't human beings. And so they announced to the digital industry, Mark Pritchard, like they're pulling out in December. If we don't fix it, they're pulling out. And that Procter & Gamble and then the other packaged goods guys follow them. That's probably half the digital spend.
But I think this, Olga raises a really good point that everyone who's in marketing needs to remember, and that is that the technology and the analytics and the business people have to work together. And when
Yes,
you start to plan a campaign or organize a strategy and an omni-channel strategy, we've had a disconnect, not just between digital and mainstream, but we've had a disconnect between the business people and the techie people. And an even further disconnect, if you understand what I mean, between the technology people and the methodology people. If there's any software companies in the room, I'll apologize in advance, but the salespeople for the software companies will tell you, oh, I've got a solution, I've got an algorithm, you just run this. That's BS, frankly. Everything that you run on top of a platform and on top of a piece of software has to be designed by people who understand a business and who understand the right methodology to answer the question at the right time. And so if you guys are designing and developing programs and marketing campaigns, you have to be your own advocates. You have to tell your stories, you have to show your results, you have to bridge the gap between the geeks and the business people to make sure that the programs and the KPIs and the monitoring is always responding to the changing needs of the business, which it comes back to breaking down silos and making sure that the support comes from the highest level in your company for good data-driven marketing. And you may say, well, how do I ensure I get support from up there? Well, one of the ways you get support from up there is you become your own advocate. You show the results, you socialize, you find a way for the work that you're doing to integrate with other parts of your organization. And you always come back to what I was doing, 2 months ago might not be okay for what I was doing now, and you can't let programs run in the background.
Yeah, because I did it last year is a really bad reason to do it this year. Olga, maybe you could comment on this. How far out are you ahead in your planning? What are you working on now? At the strategic level?
Everything.
So I know you're working on a lot, like the campaigns that are about to break, but how far ahead of yourself are you? Are you working on next spring, in other words?
We are working on what just launched today, what's launching tomorrow, Q3 and Q4, the 3-year plan and the 5-year plan.
So, what's that saying, Jen? Plan to fail, or fail to plan?
Feel- yeah,
Fail to plan,
it's
plan to fail.
yeah.
Right. So look, you've got some brilliant talent here. So I'm sure that some of you have questions, and I want to make sure that we allow for those questions. So would any of you like to ask anything of Jen or Olga? Yes, here at the back. We get you this. Thank you. Don't want to be throwing it around. There's liability, right?
So first, I want to thank you both all three of you actually, for a lot of useful information today. My question is for you, Olga. So bell.ca, if you go on the website and you have any do not track softwares, you actually get the message that the website does not work if you have any of those softwares, and just simply that you have to enable them in order to browse the website. So my question is, how was that decision reached strategically at Bell? And more importantly, how did it affect your metrics and KPIs? Did you see a drop in traffic, conversions, anything similar? Thank you.
So a lot of the website traffic is quite measured. It's a key indicator, for us. And I think that's really what led to the decision. Is it's a really good proxy for what's happening in the marketplace. I don't know if you remember back in, I guess it was November, the 10 gigabyte that just exploded. That wasn't advertised. Like there was no digital ads on that. There was no in-store signage on that. It certainly got out in the social platforms pretty quickly. But our website and all the traffic that happened there and what people did and where they went, we certainly saw it all happen there. So it really is an indicator for us on what's happening in the marketplace, because you can just pop in and look at those metrics.
We just answered this question for one of our clients. I believe whether any law tells you to or not, the right thing to do when a cookie pop-up pops up is give them a yes/no option. And if they choose no, turn off the tracking. Like we forgot our manners with digital somewhere along the line. We forgot to be polite to our customers and our prospect. And if they ask cookies to be turned off, it's not a big deal. Turn them off. You can still get the aggregate data, but you're not collecting personal data. So, some of my clients said, well, what does GDPR say? I said, forget about what GDPR says about it. What do you say about it? How do you want to treat your customers?
But Derek, the other side of that, is if you do track and the cookies are there and they're useful for brands to understand their customers, then pay attention to it.
Sure.
One thing that drives me crazy is if I go on a website and I search for something and I find the item and I buy it online with my name and address and it gets delivered to me, and then you continue to send me that same ad for a year. Don't you know I already bought it? So if you're tracking me, at least use it to stop being a pain in the neck, right?
Biggest problem with remarketing.
Yeah.
You don't know when they bought.
Yeah, when to turn it off. Yeah.
I bought it.
Yeah.
I put my name and address
Yeah, right.
in there. You know my IP address. You know who I am. You're following me around.
Right.
Get with the program.
Right.
You can actually do that.
You know what my wife calls that? She says, like going into a ladies' wear store, and they say, no thanks, I'm just looking. And she goes to this section, and out from behind the rack pops that sales clerk asking if she would like that in her size. And she kind of goes, I said I was just looking. So she equates remarketing to the commissioned salesperson in the retail store who just won't go away. So you exit the store with no bag. Any more questions? Again, you got two great folks up here. Yeah, please.
Thank you. With regards to GDPR, our organization is currently wrestling with becoming compliant on a global basis with the current GDPR standards and even some of the stricter UK and German standards. And we have been wrestling with the idea or with the concept of right to be forgotten, and whether or not that literally means forget that contact, literally eliminate them from your system, which means you have no record of compliance. What are your thoughts on that particular challenge?
Has to be sorted out. It's a really tough one. I was at a meeting in Ottawa last week, which is the first setting up an industry advisory group to the Canadian Standards Council on the implementation of GDPR-like compliance for Canada. They're way back at looking at, if you're looking at this ISO 2778 rule in the Canadian standards, is it equivalent to this GDPR? So there's a few really big issues, and I don't have an opinion yet, because I want to see, my customers are banks, insurance companies, telecoms. I want to understand what's going to work for them. You have to, it seems to me you have to be able to demonstrate compliance. And so, we're, in Canada, in some ways, we're almost ahead in our track record of implementation, but some of the details are yet to be determined, so I'm not going to speculate on it.
It is, in fact, a worldwide web. Are we ever going to move toward a global standard?
Oh, that's what I think we have to.
I think GDPR may be the birth of that.
Well, interestingly enough, if you're a marketer in the North American context, then all your American bosses and departments that you report into will tell you, oh, Canada's so weird. The reality is that the U.S. is the outlier.
Yes.
That's the Wild West. They can do whatever
Yes.
they like with anybody's data, no matter what, and nobody gets in any trouble for anything. So Canada is very close to Europe, and we do business on both sides of the border, and so we had U.S. customers that we do work for out of our Canadian office asking us about GDPR, not because they care about what we're going to do in Canada, but because they want to have a global standard. I think the businesses that are global are going to move to compliance and standard rules even before the regulatory requirements are there from the U.S., because nobody wants to have a different compliance rule in Europe than in the United States. So I think there will be an industry move to global standards. I think that all these, like there are treaties and negotiations around data sharing and data governance already, and that's why the Canadian Standards Council is getting involved, as well as the other organizations. But I think people will, like with many other aspects of standards, people will take this part of this regulation is what covers that, and that's what we have for Canada, and then we have something else for Germany. And eventually it will kind of be a body of work, but of course you're going to have all these consultants who are going to certify and audit like we have on SSAE and ISO and all those things. So it's going to be a while to sort itself out.
Because it's early stages, we're advising our clients to take it offline, take it off any processing that you're doing. So if somebody does request to be erased, erase them in terms of don't communicate with them anymore, don't process their data in any way, move them offline, but inform them that their file is being kept for in case of lawsuits or to prove. Right?
And that doesn't seem to be the way that the regulation
It actually is. There are parts in the regulation that will give you that out. Okay, so they're saying if there's a legal reason to keep it, you can, but don't process against it and get it offline. That's what we're advising our clients. All you can do at this point, it's funny because GDPR compliance is becoming, it's mirroring what happened with Castle, where everybody's waiting and just before the enforcement date, everybody's now panicking. And so the patterns are very similar. And really what you got to do is read the law, read the guidance, and read the fines. Now, we haven't seen any fines yet from GDPR, so that's the next element.
But the difference is
Right.
we are not subject to the GDPR.
No, we are if we're marketing in Europe.
If you're marketing in Europe,
Yeah.
then you are, but in terms of what, well,
Yes.
but if you can't market to a German resident, but does the GDPR requirement that you not keep that name in your database for compliance purposes apply to a Canadian company? Do you know the answer to that?
I don't.
No, I don't either.
We're assuming it's a global requirement on our part because it's too difficult to understand
Yeah.
whether, when you first engage.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, some regulators.
By the way, folks, with GDPR, there are 100 tunnels like this you can go down that end up very dark.
The regulators from Canada that were in Europe a couple of weeks ago were kind of saying, it's not confidential, but it's, you know, it's gossip, it's behind the scenes. For what it's worth, if you are reading the law, understanding your gaps, and building a roadmap, nobody's going to come after you. Like, unless you're, you know, one of the big tech companies, then those are where we're going to have examples made in the
If
short
you're
term.
collecting and
Right,
using
so-
data as part of your product, you're probably on the radar, but if you're just doing business,
But even if there are things that are unclear, if you're focusing on it and trying to understand it and create a roadmap,
right.
you're not likely to be in their sites. Now, I also, we hear a lot of speculation that the main thrust in Europe is going to be to make examples of you-know-who and you-know-who else, because that's kind of what everybody.
Well, Ireland went from 30 people in their privacy office, enforcement office, to 120 in the last 6 months. And Ireland houses most of the American tech companies. And Ireland is just chomping at the bit to go, whereas the ICO, Elizabeth Denman, has clearly said that she will offer guidance and help. And so it's a very wide topic. You know, you can't talk about digital without talking about it, but I'd like to thank Jan and Olga for your contributions today. We should wrap up and stay on time. We have one more question? Okay.
Well, I had a quick question, but
Sure.
this is actually for Olga. Because we had talked this morning about trends for 2018, 2019, and you just briefly said that you're already looking ahead to tomorrow, 3 and 5 years down the road. Are there any strategies that you're employing today that you think are quickly or slowly losing their luster in the digital marketing world that you're going to start looking at phasing out over the next few years?
Great question. And I think really our approach is we're just always testing something. So if there's betas, we're in there. We've always got a certain amount of the budget that's just put aside for the testing. And to your point, what worked once, certainly you don't see it continuing to work. So it's just being on top of all of the mediums. I mean, there's 15, 20 different, you know, digital mediums to play in, to be in. And just keeping an eye on them, because some of our big winners that a couple years ago we always counted on, we're seeing the results go down. We're throwing other ones in there. Some of them do well, some of them don't. So it's hard to predict, and it changes so quickly. So for 3 years out, 5 years out, you don't know what that's going to be, other than just continuing to monitor, continue to don't take anything for granted that because it worked before, it's going to continue to work, and just be open to continually changing up your mix.
So start from zero every time.
Just about,
Yeah.
yeah.
Good. Okay. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.